limitations of the current system. Treats major scale as the primary reference, forcing reinterpretation of all other modes. So we're basically saying, here's the major key, and then we're going to change the major key or reference every other key to the major key, which could have its uses when you're looking at interval relationships. But if you're renaming the scale degrees, that becomes a problem. So it requires consistent renaming of scale degrees. So again, Nashville number system is right. That's the more sophisticated system. So there's a reason it came up. It's not like people are stupid and they're like, hey, I don't know the numbers when you change it to a Dorian. So, well, look, what we'll do is we'll just keep the numbers the same as though you're in the related major. Yeah, why don't we do that all the time? Because that makes sense. That makes more sense, right? There's a reason the shortcut happened. It's because the current system is more bureaucratically bloated than it needs to be. The shortcut is the eagle's paths, flying as the crow flies, and the current system is going around the mountain, and when you don't need to. So misrepresents the diatonic system by making players think they are changing keys when shifting modes. So most people learn the major number system, and then they remember that the 1, 4, 5 is major, the 2, 3, and 6 is minor, and the 7 is Locrian. But if you don't know the nuances that the 1, 4, 5 are actually different on the guitar, then it's going to lead you to think that you're shifting the major shape every time. The scale degree forces you to do that too, because to build a chord, you have to say it's the 1, 3, 5. The naming convention of a 1, 3, 5 forces you to think of the root as the 1 when you don't want to change it to the 1. If I'm building the root off of the 6, the Aeolian, I want to keep it as the 6. I don't want to call it a 1, 4, 5 because now you're making me call it a 1. See that whole system is gonna walk out your whole naming convention, which is gonna really mess you up when you're trying to learn all the locations in the most optimal way. So it creates redundancy and confusion when intervals and chord types. So you got like a minor 7 and a dominant 7 and so on, which again would be the name is not as clean as it could be. It lacks clarity on where you are within the single shared diatonic scale. So once again, it would be a lot easier to name the chords instead of saying I'm going to the 1, 4, 5 and think of them as 3 major chords, to be saying that you're going to the 1, 4, 5 and see them as different locations. The 1 is the Ionian, the 4 is the Lydian, the 5 is the Mixolydian, which will make more sense because on the 5, for example, if I add the 7 to it, it's going to be a different shape than over here. Because again, the Mixolydian is different once you start adding more than just the triad locations. If I play in the minor key, the related minor to the C major, same shape, I don't want to call the A the 1. If I play all the minors and the root being the 6, I want to call it the 6, 2, 3. That's going to be a lot easier to not change the continent. Don't change the continent names. Keep them the same. So the mode-based alternative. So each chord is built from a modal center. So we have the Ionian, the Dorian, the Phrygian, the Lydian, the Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian. Now there's conspiracy theories out there. People are trying to scare us to say that the modes are too intimidating, so they don't want to learn. They're too confusing. But again, it's more intuitive to use the modes. The Nashville number system, which is supposed to be a shortcut hack, is basically using modes. It's just changing the name to a number, which is fine. But to really master that system, you want to realize that the number is different. The 1 is different from the 4 is different from the 5. It has the same shape if you look at a triad, but it's a different location on the guitar. And if you go beyond the 3-note chord, it will be different. So I think it would be well worth your time to learn the modes. And then I'm going to give an abbreviation of the modes because these are the continents on your guitar that don't change. That's what you want to memorize. So an example, we could build a chord construction something like this. We could say it's a DD3. What does that stand for? It's a Dorian. That's what this D stands for. And that's the mode. The root is a D, so it's a D Dorian. And it's a 3 modal whole steps. So it means it's a 4-note chord. So again, this looks kind of messy, but it's actually cleaner oftentimes than much of the systems that we currently have. And the construction of it is really easy. So because you just take every other note. So in other words, I'm on the Dorian. The Dorian is usually the 2 from our Nashville number system. So I'm not going to rename it as the 1 when I build my chord. So instead of saying it's a 4-note chord and I have to say it's going to be the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7, I'm just going to say, no, look, I'm just going to start on the Dorian, right? I'm going to start on the Dorian, which is, I'll keep as the 2, and then I'm going to go up 3, what I call modal whole steps, meaning I'm just going to skip every other note. That's how we build chords. We'll get into this more detail when we actually map this out in Excel, but you just skip every other note, right? So you just go we're going to skip every other note, and we build up our chord. And so it's actually a 4-note chord. The reason I have a 3 there is because that's the distance. It's a distance term, meaning you're going to start on this node, and then you're going to skip every other note that is in the scale, every other mode, every other node, every other Nashville number system. That's the most intuitive way to build it. Now remember, there are 3 ways that we can build the chord. We can kind of visualize it on the guitar by shape. We can use the holes, and we can use the formula to build a chord, and we can also use intervals. So you might say, look, I don't know the intervals of the Dorian, and that's fair enough, but you do know intuitively that you just pick every other note of the 7 notes that you're playing in. So that would be the easy kind of way to build it. And most people possibly don't really know the intervals that well for the major as well. They mostly know the shapes. So it would be great to learn the intervals, and you could learn the intervals for all the different chords as well, and that would be a good thing to do. But even if you don't know the intervals, this would be way more intuitive to do by shape. It would be way more intuitive to do if you just build it by taking every other note. I just know it's a 4-note chord, a 4-note Dorian chord. I'm just going to start on the 2, and I'm just going to skip every other note. It also tells me where I am on the guitar. It gets me more reference point on the guitar. Now you might say no one else does that. That's fine, but I think it would still be easier for you to write down your ideas, because it gives you the context of the song. It gives you more ability to see what you're trying to do. And then if you want to communicate it to other people that don't know that system, you can convert it easy, because ChatGPT can just make the conversion. You could just say, hey, look, ChatGPT, here's the system that I'm using. Convert it to whatever normal chords that you have, allowing you to write your music, write down your ideas, and the way that makes most intuitive sense to you, gives you the best visualization of the fretboard, and then convert them if you need to. You can also go the other way. If someone gives you something, you might say, look, this is a mess. ChatGPT, convert it to this modal system, and it can do it, and will most likely make it a lot easier for you to visualize what's actually happening within the song. So modal steps represent consistent structures across the fretboard. So a DD3 would represent a Dorian chord built on the tonal center. So in other words, if we used a system like this and say, hey, look, this is the D chord, we have the ability to make a lowercase or uppercase. So I could also make it say it's a capital D for a capital Dorian, to indicate that that's the tonal center, that's the home base. So that gives us more flexibility too than what we currently have. Like when you say something, when you're playing in the current system, there's no real way to indicate that it's the tonal center with a capital letter, which you could do if you use this kind of format. So that's kind of a cool little thing as well. So that would be the general idea. We can locate where we are on the fretboard and say, here's the Dorian right here. So if I'm building a chord off of the Dorian, then I can skip every other note from the Dorian to build the chord. So all I need to know is how many notes are in the chord and what node we are starting on. That will help me to basically just construct the chord. So we'll get into intervals. We could build it by interval or build it by shape as well. We'll talk about that later. We could also just know that, of course, the Dorian is the 2, and therefore it's a minor chord. So if it was a triad, it would have a minor chord. If we go beyond the triad, we're going to have to know when the Dorian is different than the minor chord, when it's different than the Aeolian, right? Because that's when the shape is going to be different from the Dorian, and that could get into intervals or more complex shape learning, but there's no way around learning that. And if you learn the modal system, you will realize that you need to learn that, right? If you just learn that this Dorian is the same as a minor chord, then you're not going to understand that that you're actually in a different shape. You're not going to understand that that it's going to have an interval that's different than the major or when that comes up. So even if you don't know what that interval is, it's better to say, it's like learning a shortcut to math that doesn't iterate forward. I've learned a shortcut that only works under these very isolated conditions, but once I expand the window, the shortcut not only doesn't work, but acts as a barrier for me to understand the true nature of what is happening here. That's what happens here if you see the Dorian and you make it the 1 and you see it then as a major, even though it's as a minor chord, even though it's a Dorian, right? It leads you to misread where you are on the fretboard and what the shape looks like in its full extension.